quantum computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Jose Berlanga, thank you so much for joining us here on the Intelligent Performance podcast. An absolute pleasure to have you joining us straight in from beautiful Texas, or Houston, Texas. First of all, good evening to you, Jose, and thanks for joining us.
Michael, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Texas, not necessarily beautiful according to everyone, but there's certainly a lot of opportunities.
It's certainly a lot. Well, I think, and hopefully we can touch on those. Now, your background is something, it's very multicolored. I think it's like a Rubik's Cube of expertise, especially when it comes to all things entrepreneurship. So, Jose, I'm really keen to dive into a number of different things. We're going to focus specifically around property development in terms of your take on that. But I'd love to hear, or maybe if you could share just briefly, a bit of a summary for your kind of mixed and varied journey through this world of entrepreneurism, because it's been quite the whirlwind.
Yes. That itch, the curiosity of the business world does not end. I get asked very often if there's ever enough, if I feel satisfied with what I've done, if I feel successful, if I feel accomplished, and the answer is no. I feel like I still have so much to do. From the time that I started, even now, I feel like I haven't gotten to where I want to get. It doesn't matter how many years or how many businesses you start or build. There's always that identity of just being curious and being ambitious and motivated. Having that type of personality that wakes you up in the middle of the night or early in the morning with the anxiety of wanting to do something and build something. Not always sure what it is, but yeah, it just comes with the territory. Being an entrepreneur, it's fun, it's exciting, it's also scary, but it's exhausting most of all. If you have that type of brain, which I'm sure you have, it never stops. Yeah. I am tired of myself. Sometimes I want to shut it down, go on vacation and take a little bit of a break, but there is no such thing. I don't remember just taking a day off when I wasn't thinking of something I needed to do or improve or perfect. So that's been my life, just starting businesses, building them and operating them, which is also one of the tough parts, being the operator. But that's what works. You have to start somewhere. Eventually you can become more of an investor and put your money to work. But at first you have to operate things and be the one working for a living.
And makes you a better investor too, right? As you kind of understand what's actually involved. And maybe we can touch on, you've been involved with industries like the auto industry, food and beverage, manufacturing. Now you're in property and built hundreds of homes. I'm curious, we're big on counterintuitive thinking here on the Intelligent Performance podcast. So actually, what's your take on that? How would you describe intelligent performance?
Oh, there are so many ways, of course, but there's a word called focus that we use a lot in the business world. You have to focus on something that you truly want to achieve. But the big difference that I see in perhaps part of the intelligence of being a successful business person is to understand that focus is not for a few moments at a time. It's for months and perhaps years at a time. The real focus of getting something done means that there is nothing more important in your brain at any given point, morning, afternoon, weekends, or holidays, than your mission. And it is tiring, but it is eventually what starts coming together. The little steps that accumulate over a period of time eventually start coming together, turning it into a successful enterprise, a successful business. But it's not focusing for a little bit at a time, at least not in my experience. I carry my responsibilities. I carry my work. I carry lists of things to do in my brain everywhere I go. And eventually I started looking back and seeing how far I've gone with some of these projects. But they don't happen by me just spending a little time on any of these developments. It's a lot of dedication, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of time. And knowing that if you embark on a big project, call it entrepreneurship, it has to be your number one priority in focus for as long as you can, until you start achieving a certain level of success where you can start handing off certain responsibilities to other people. But at first, you're everything. You are the misconception of owning a business, which is achieving freedom and having more time and having more flexibility. It's quite the contrary. You become really, really limited with your time, and the business takes over your life. And it's quite the opposite, where you actually have many bosses, many people to report to, from clients, employees, bankers, lenders, investors. Everyone ends up working with you, but you actually are working for them just as much, and the level of responsibility increases. So you have to understand and go in with that mentality that no, it's eventually we'll have many benefits and a better life and all of these other things that come with success. But at first, it gets worse before it gets better.
I love it. It's a very real kind of insight to the world of entrepreneurship. Certainly one I've experienced, maybe in the midst of experiencing as well, Jose. I'm kind of in the thick of it at the moment. And it's interesting. I'm curious, you're a little bit older than myself, Jose, so I'm curious, your reflections. It sounds like you've been through that journey, and now you're at, instead of operating in terms of building homes, you're now on the investment piece. Take us back a moment just to kind of where it started. So it was in the oil and gas space where you're bringing in equipment. When did you decide, this entrepreneurialism thing is for you? Because as you say, that's scary. That first step can be really overwhelming, maybe is a way to put it.
Yes. That's always a great question. What the question of all questions, how did you start? What led you to want to become your own boss, to own your own business? What type of business? How do you get rid of some of those insecurities, some of those scary moments? And to me, it was a little bit of an opposite process. I had a little more of a concern in not managing and controlling my future than putting it in someone else's hands, combined with the fact that I had more of an insecurity in looking for a job, in having to work for other people that would dictate my time and my schedules and my future, than putting it in my own hands. I ended up thinking that I was a little more scared to not go on my own and to make my own destiny and make my own choices than to put it in someone else's hands. So that's from day one. That was one of it felt less scary to me to start in that route than to just go and get a job. Not that I didn't try, but the few experiences I've had, they didn't go very well in my attempts of getting employed. So I decided maybe I'll go on my own. And really the best way to decide how to go about it is you have to somewhat have some level of experience, contacts, or know something about any given industry before you jump into it. And in my case, I knew I had friends in the business and in the machinery for the oil and gas, because that's where my father had been in a similar business. So it made sense for me to follow those footsteps. But eventually one experience led to another. And if you have that spirit of starting things, the opportunities eventually come to you.
Interesting. I'm curious, a lot of people they stumble very much to begin with. In terms of your journey, what was that process like in terms of learning the ropes? Because there's often that kind of reality check, as you mentioned, it gets worse before it gets better. And sometimes the better can take decades, right? especially in terms of what you're talking about. It takes long times to deliver on these projects. So what was your journey like in that earlier period?
It wasn't easy. Certainly, my scariest moment was not starting my first business, but failing with my first business, losing my first business. That was scary. That felt like the end of the world. Because when I started, I had and perhaps this answers the question, my expectations weren't very high. When I started a business, I came from the notion, from the understanding that it was going to be very difficult. I already knew that. I grew up under very difficult circumstances. I have a very particular life that was full of setbacks and adversity, where I understood that building a business was going to be very difficult, that I wasn't going to make money right away, that I was going to have to spend all of my spare time. So I knew these things that perhaps a lot of people don't know. A lot of people assume that it's going to work the way they intended it and the way they planned it. I didn't think that. I knew it wasn't going to work out. But to my surprise, it started doing well relatively soon. My effort, my ability to sell, my ability to market myself, to build relationships started working very well. So that was more of a surprise to me, doing better than I anticipated. I guess sometimes like the saying goes, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. I was hoping things to go well, but I knew that it wasn't going to go as wonderful as all of us would like to. And when it got very, very scary is when my market, not necessarily my business, but my market, the economy and the industry in general started changing. And all of a sudden it caught me in a very, very difficult position. So that was scary because I thought that I was already set with this particular business. This is something that perhaps in my experience is a much dangerous position. The first time you start a business is scary, but when you lose a business and you don't know where to go from there, that was one of the most difficult, challenging times in my career. Finding what is the next step now. I attempted it, I did well, then it didn't do so well, and I lost the business for one reason or another. And now what? So that took me a while to process. I think facing your first failure, your first major setback, not minor hiccups on the road that we're all going to have, but actually losing your money, losing your business and having to start all over. That's been one of the scariest times. And it's happened to me several times. It doesn't get any easier, I have to admit, but I don't, the answer I've had is I didn't have a choice but to just keep going and looking for the next opportunity.
Interesting, Jose. Really, really cool. So I'm curious, the first one failed, or the first, it was a real tricky time in the market, just disappeared. You've kind of then jumped across multiple different industries, but yet you use the word focus. So I'm curious, you hear in different entrepreneurial kind of endeavors, do you actually face significant setbacks when you jump industry? Because you can, you lose a lot of the expertise or a lot of the kind of the experience and the know-how in those spaces. What was your experience? Why do you choose to go down that route in terms of, jumping, and forgive me, that's my word, not necessarily yours, but moving from different industries and trying different things?
Yes, absolutely. And it's not recommended, by the way. I always preach that we must become experts in our field, perfect what we do, understand what we do, and stick to it. And that is not what I did. That is not what I did. I've jumped from one industry to another. I also have to mention that I've never necessarily quit an industry or a job or a business. Simply failed altogether. It kicked me out of the industry. I'll just talk about the first example. I was a middleman. I was a broker, an international broker, an acquisitions department for these petrochemical companies. All of a sudden, things started changing where the environment, technology, the internet, exclusive distributorships came about, and my particular business became more obsolete. Not to mention, it combined it with a bad moment in the economy where my clients stopped paying me on time and eventually put me in a very, very difficult financial position. So when I started looking in other opportunities is because I didn't have a choice. I didn't feel like continuing as a broker, as a middleman for that particular business would take me anywhere. So that's the answer, is when you find yourself in a situation where you can continue in the same industry or find a job or find an opportunity within the same area, it makes sense. I just didn't have it at that particular moment. I had to look for brand new opportunities in different fields, but I did have an asset. I had the personality, the relationships where people trusted me. People knew that I was responsible, that I was accountable, that I knew how to build things, that I knew how to put together things. And I gradually started putting other businesses together a little bit at a time. It became one of the things that it's important during this transition is to begin to understand the language of business. Businesses, although differ in products and services, they have a lot of common factors. They have a lot of similarities. Your standards may change, the lingo may change, the numbers in general, your costs, your cost of goods, your percentages and averages and this and that. But overall, they're all very similar. It's all about understanding the process, understanding the team that you need to put together, understanding the factors of a financial statement, of a balance sheet, understanding cash flow. Once you start getting familiar with the fundamentals of owning and operating a business, you can translate those into a different industry. And that came somewhat easy to me. Understanding the fundamentals, eventually I could grab the know-how, the knowledge of knowing how to run one business and apply it to a different one. And yes, there was a learning curve. There definitely was, but selling one product or selling another one eventually started getting easier. Whereby the third time and the fourth time and getting into a new, completely new field, it somewhat became easier over time. It wasn't easy to start from scratch once you lost perhaps your money or your business. The emotional part is very difficult. But the exercise of building something again gets a little bit more comfortable in your mind.
I'm curious in terms of the context that you're in. In many different countries, I saw a post yesterday by a UK-based entrepreneur, and he was talking in quite damning sense around the UK's kind of approach to entrepreneurialism. They're talking about a 39% capital gains tax for people who do realize a gain. I'm curious, how much do you think the context of being and operating inside of the US, where failure seems to be welcomed, or maybe that's the wrong word, but certainly they have a different approach to it than many?
Yes. I agree. We live in an environment, in a society in the US where entrepreneurship is welcome. It's a normal thing. More and more people, the newer generations, they want to create a job rather than find a job. And I wouldn't necessarily think that anybody does it for any given benefit, including taxation, or financial benefits. Like you would see in real estate, there are benefits in certain industries under certain characteristics. But you go into entrepreneurship because this particular society promotes it a lot. It allows you to do it. It's very easy. In 5 minutes, you can start an entity, create a company, find someone to help you in putting together the financial aspects of it. There's a lot of outsourcing of the different services where, assuming that you devote the time and you have a little bit of understanding of the fundamentals, it's not a very difficult process. I would say that the challenge is to grow the business and to turn it into a success. That is easier said than done. But starting it from the ground up it's literally having an idea, having a concept, of course, differentiating it, spending a little time understanding what it is that you're going to be doing different than everybody else in your industry. So that's why when the time was right, eventually to get into something else like construction, the starting process was very quick. Locating a property, acquiring it, eventually getting the financing, eventually putting your team together. I had all of that expertise. Building it was, again, building it and compounding and perhaps scaling it up into a certain amount of volume. That is always much more challenging. They always say that a lot of businesses fail in their efforts to grow. And that's very true. You put yourself in an extremely vulnerable position because you're borrowing more capital, you're putting more risk, you're hiring more people, you're delegating activities, you're creating more job descriptions, designing who's doing what and why, who can handle the different areas of your business, allocating all of this and doing it right and having time to get it right before you run out of cash. It's a very difficult task. So a lot of businesses remain what they call mom and pop businesses, just a small operation, because they don't want to scale it up to the next level where now you need a completely different layer, a completely different mentality, where you need management, where you need more sophisticated forms, let's say, of operating. And at that point, you have to let go of a lot of things. In a small family business, you can have your attention everywhere. But once you start scaling it up, now you have to trust. It's sort of like having children. Once they start driving, I haven't gotten there. My kids are still very young, but I hear that over and over that I'm in the easy stages of having children. Once they start driving and living their lives, now you have to let go and assume that a lot of things are going okay and give up some of that control. That happens when you start building and growing a business.
I love that. It's a really great way to think about it. I'm curious, when you look back, what's been your number? Like, if you were to start again, Jose, what would you do?
Yeah, and I hope that doesn't happen. I'm trying to be much more careful now. But that's a very, very interesting question. And I'm going to, before I give a specific type of activity, I'm going to say that throughout my career, I've allowed myself to gradually start understanding, and it takes time to understand what am I good at and what do I enjoy, and combine those two. We always talk about finding your passion and doing good to society and doing something fruitful and productive. But many people find a passion in an area that is not necessarily profitable, that cannot allow you to make money. Where there are activities such, where you love them, but they don't make you a living. Or vice versa. You want to make a living and you're good at it, but you don't enjoy them. Yeah. So I had to start all over. Now, let's go to the question. I think that took me all these years to start understanding what are some of the things that I'm good at, some of the things that I enjoy, and how to put those together and turn them into a business. Naturally, I'm more of a deal maker than a business operator. And ironically, I spend the bulk of my career operating businesses instead of putting deals together and passing them on to a team that knows how to operate businesses. So I'm gradually understanding that. And one of the recommendations I give younger people is that don't wait for the perfect opportunity to start your career. The young generation is very big on finding the perfect scenario, the perfect industry, the perfect job, or they just don't want anything to do with it. And that's a mistake. It never starts perfect. You have to embark on your journey, get on the boat, get in the car, and start driving, and little by little adjust the direction in which you're headed within your career. But you can't wait until it's perfect, because you're going to evolve, you're going to grow, you're going to mature, you're going to learn about yourself, learn more about what your qualifications are in the business world. And at that point, you start adapting and handing off some of those things that you're not very good at, and eventually start to enjoy your business a little more. Otherwise, it becomes a very long journey if you don't match those two. So I would definitely get whatever career I would choose if I had to start all over. I would be much faster in assigning some of the areas that I'm not good at to someone else. Those are some of my mistakes, that I grew up in an era where you had to take on every job. You had to be responsible for everything. You had to really suffer a lot in order. Suffering always went hand in hand with success. You had to deserve that success by being in charge of everything, whether it was painful activities or not. And yes, at first, I understand that's the case. You have to do, you have to pay your dues. You have to do the administrative, you have to do your legal, you have to do your office work, you have to do all these other things that you don't enjoy, that are not very pleasurable, perhaps. But eventually, you start finding the right team. And historically, I've been slow at doing that. I am, as many entrepreneurs, I'm a control freak. And I find it very difficult to pass on some of those tasks, because I fear, since I've had businesses go bad, I fear them failing because I wasn't there to pay attention. So that's another area of business that we have to learn.
I love that. It's very real, Jose. I think that's what you're more authentic than most. I think you don't give too much of a polished view of this entrepreneurialism, because I think it's certainly hyped up to be like really amazing, I think. And then I look at and I go, you really shouldn't. Most people shouldn't try this, or maybe you should try it and then realize that it's certainly not everyone's cup of tea. I think it's not everything it's made out to be. So
you're very right. It's not for everyone. It's not.
No.
So identify that. Get to know yourself before you and understand what it is. Not every personality is willing to devote so much to it. You have to have certain characteristics. You have to be obsessive compulsive. You have to be stubborn. You have to be ambitious. You have to have a little bit of control. You have to suffer. That this may sound crazy, but I do believe that in order to be a good entrepreneur, you have to suffer a little bit from anxiety. You have to have this ongoing anxiety that does not allow you to stop. Because a big difference between wanting to work for a company, and yes, you can go very far when you work for someone else and be very successful. But there's a very big difference in being an entrepreneur than working for someone else or being an executive. When you're an entrepreneur, you don't want the day to be over. You fight every minute of every hour, and you suffer when the clock starts running out on you, because there's still so much more to do, and it's never enough time. When you work for someone else, you want time to go a little bit faster. You want to be done. You want to go rest. You want to go do what you really want to do. And that, if you don't have that personality that just cannot have enough time to do what you need to do, if you don't have that personality that is always inventing work, I don't remember a single minute in the last almost 40 years of me being an entrepreneur that I didn't have a long list of things to do. Not 1 minute. Care what part of the world I was. If I was vacationing in or in an island or on the other side of the world, I had a long list of things to do and worries that I took with me. And I didn't have one single minute when I didn't carry them with me. If you don't have that personality, that tolerance to pain, that tolerance to stress, then this is not for you. And you just have to acknowledge it and be okay with it. You know, the world requires all kinds of personalities. You just have to be honest with yourself and know what it is that you're supposed to do in the world.
I'm curious, given that you're preaching not what you've practiced in many ways, Jose, which I think it's admirable actually in some ways, because it's kind of like don't do as I've done. The key thing, one reflection, or it was something you raised there, was you realized you're not such an operator and are better as a deal maker. I'm curious to those who might have similar reflections, but they find them deep in operational territory. What would be your advice to someone who's starting to really think, crikey, yeah, maybe this operational piece isn't for me, or vice versa? Maybe they've got caught up in deal making, but actually they feel like they're better operators. How would you typically advise someone in that domain?
No, absolutely. I would recommend in people in the early stages of their career to try them both, because you may surprise yourself. I am more, for example, something that people don't believe about myself is that I'm more of an introvert than anything else. I'm very good at dealing with people, but I enjoy quiet moments and doing my own thing without always selling and being social and marketing and promoting. I do that, but I've also learned that I have other talents. So unless you try everything, you don't start really understanding what it is that you like and what it is that you're good at. But at first, I think you have to really, really understand that if you're going to run a company, you're going to have to do everybody's jobs to really understand the ins and outs of your company. That is part of it that I always recommend. Don't hire people without understanding what they're doing, and or hand out activities that you don't fully understand yourself, unless you have a very trusted partner or someone that you trust with everything that can run certain areas of your company. But it took me a while for me to really, really know what were some of my talents. And also it took me a while to develop some of them. So some of them, they may appear that it's not something for you, but little by little, you start making those changes in your career. And I've done that, where if eventually I'm not doing good at something, I keep trying though. That's probably the persistence and the stubbornness of many of us. But I do at least recognize it. Be honest with yourself is something that many of us are not. We want to convince ourselves that we are better in some areas than we truly are, perhaps. So that is one of my talents. I'm very honest. I'm a very, very tough judge of character with myself. I'm very tough at really knowing what it is that my weaknesses are more than my strengths, and I repeat it to myself as many times as possible until I understand.
Jose, forgive me. I just need to pause this. I've got my au pair who's just calling me, and I'm just trying to work out. If you can just pause 1 second, I want to move into property development. So if you can just bear with me just 1 second. Sorry about that, Jose. That was I keep knocking my au pair on the screen door.
That's the distractions. That's
it. Hog life, especially with kids. So actually, well, maybe that's an interesting place that I'd like to touch on. You've touched briefly there on your family, and specifically you've got younger children. I'm curious, many entrepreneurs have a a wake of ruined family life, often as a, that maybe the balance to the focus which business requires can often mean that you're not focused on family. I'm curious, how have you navigated that juggle?
Very difficult. It's very difficult even today. I had a blessing, which was that I started very young in my career before I had a family, and I took advantage of it. So before I give my opinion as to how to deal with it, I'll give my opinion as to how to minimize the impact, which is if you can, start young. Start when you don't have children or a family or financial obligations, dead weight. At some point, it becomes harder. And most of us, when we're young, we don't recognize that. We think we have all the time in the world and that at some point we'll get serious about business and about our careers. Well, that is the time to get it done, because eventually it's going to get very difficult. So I got a head start on my business, although I had my failures, and I had as soon as I got married, this is something that not many people know, but right as I got married, the financial crisis hit and I lost everything. I lost millions and millions, and every month was a disaster for me for a period of time. So I had to start again after I got married. Didn't have children yet, but I had to figure out how to balance that. I thought I had it taken care of and that I wouldn't have to worry about it because I had enough money where I didn't have to make my business a priority. But that changed overnight, and it can happen to any of us. So what I did is I had to figure out what was the priority. And here's a recommendation. You have to be there for your family, more quality than quantity. My opinion, everybody's different. But if you face a situation like I did, then it happened to me again in 2015, not too long ago. We had we were in a very cyclical business where all of a sudden it catches you in a situation where you have, a few $100 million worth of developments going on, and the economy comes to a complete stop. Dealing with it is a nightmare. And all of a sudden you have to put everything aside. But I learned as a very young little guy from my father. I owe this to my father. He taught me a lesson. He sat me down. This is a very, very long story, but I will skip the whole story and get to the punchline. I was being left at a hospital alone for a situation, for something to deal with the accident that I had. And they left me alone at the hospital. My mother had to take care of my sister. She had to deal with those other situations, and my father had to leave me there. And I was petrified. I was scared. And he looked at me and told me, look, if I'm here with you, I cannot take care of the bills. I cannot support us. I cannot pay for the doctors. I cannot pay for food. So you're just going to have to suck it up and realize that this is how it is. Business is first, because without business, there is no family. Many people don't understand that. They think that family is first. And I get it. Family is first. But without money, without a business, there is no family. There is no medical. There is no food. There is no home. There is no nothing. And family needs to understand that. If you train them, educate them, and let them know that that's the way it works, then they will know that that's the way it works. And you start utilizing your time a little bit better, where you give them quality and you try to be the best that you can be for those moments that you're there. And eventually you'll have more of them, but that's how I don't balance the time. I balance the quality of time. And when I'm there, although very difficult, because believe me, there are many times when I'm there with my family and my brain is somewhere else. I'm trying to figure out problems, puzzles, issues, all kinds of things going on, but they wouldn't know it. I fake it till you make it. I try to let them think and believe that I am there with them, for them, even if my brain is somewhere else. So you have to develop this talent in little by little be able to be there for the important things, but also know that no, you cannot just run and take care of them every moment they need it, because otherwise your business is going to suffer, and they're going to.
I'm curious, Jose, what age was that lesson delivered?
When I had an accident when I was 4 years old. I was in an explosion, in a car explosion, where I literally died. I rarely talk about it. Not many people know the details. It's funny because even people who are close to me, they thought I used to race cars or something like that. And nobody, I don't speak about it, not because it bothers me, but because nobody ever asked me, and I don't offer the information. But yes, I grew up in a hospital, spent a lot of time alone, and I always understood that business had a place in my recovery. Wow. And perhaps I got ingrained in my brain, and it turned me also into the person that I am, and perhaps helped me understand what responsibility is and accountability. And what are some of the things that we have to do in order to some of the sacrifices that we have to make in order to take care of our family.
Wow, an extraordinary lesson to get at 4 years old, and a life-changing one, no doubt. Let's move to property development, Jose, in terms of how you've navigated that. You said just before we jumped on, you delivered a number of properties in Texas, I think specifically. I'm curious upon your reflections on that kind of operator to investor navigation in terms of what you learned, perhaps, which has made you a better investor, or maybe what you wish you knew as an operator. Now you're an investor. So something, what have been kind of your insights in terms of that capacity?
This is a very complex transition. I have to admit that even as of today, it is not easy for me. Navigating from an operator to an investor, it's very scary, to the point where I don't fully let go. I oversee. I'm not a passive. I don't believe in completely passive investments. I think they all need some work, even if it's rental property. Even if it's remodeling properties or renting to whatever level, you need to somewhat be attentive. But I have managed to build a better team, to have better people around me. But it took me a while to start understanding how to do that. There's a saying that in certain businesses, someone brings the work and someone else brings the money. And by the time it's all said and done, the other person ends up with the money and you end up having to go back to work, so you don't want to put your money in the wrong hands, or they might end up with your money and you might end up having to go back to work. So investing, I truly believe, this is a fact, making money is a completely different talent than retaining money. Building wealth is the easy part. Retaining wealth is the hard part. Imagine if making money is difficult, how hard it is to retain it. Statistically.
Go on. What do you mean by that?
Well, once you make money, there are too many ways to make mistakes, whether it is to buy the wrong things, overspend, start throwing it in ridiculous things, start investing it in wrong things. There is a talent in taking your wealth, preserving it, know where to put it, how to manage it, how to invest it, how to watch over it, and make sure that at least it remains intact. And some people have that ability. They're very good at making money out of money. That was never my expertise. I grew up learning how to produce, how to work, how to make money. By the time I started having some, I struggled a little bit knowing where to put it, put trust with my hard-earned dollars, because it was so hard to make them. So, so to answer your question, I am not one to fully delegate and walk away. As a matter of fact, and I'm not going to speak for everyone because there are masterful investors that do incredibly well. That is not me. I'm one of those people that I make money when I work hard and when I watch over my investments, and I don't make very much money. Sometimes I lose it when I just hand it over and let it grow. That hasn't been necessarily my forte. With that being said, I do have, now being in real estate, I do have particular types of developments. Here's the trick, and here's the answer, perhaps, because it's probably a rare one. I invest in developments and in investments that I understand very well, that I know the process, the timing, the steps. I can actually go jump in and take over. I can continue to consult for those people who are working with my money and monitor it better. I'm not a completely unknown, quiet investor that puts it in areas that are kind of strange to me. So that is perhaps at least my particular recommendation. It's easier to keep your investments in areas that you know a little bit about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a really humble answer in terms of what we're talking about. So, forgive me.
I'm a horrible investor, I have to admit. I'm okay. Outside of my realm of expertise, I mess it up each time. I
think it's you and many people, Jose. And I think your reflections on building versus retaining, there are two very different skill sets. And and again, this comes back to knowing what you're good at and staying within your area of expertise. So, but Jose, it's been a really fascinating and really kind of enthralling conversation. So, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time with us. It's a shame to really kind of wind up the conversation here, but I just want to say, thank you. It's been really, really great. Your website, joseberlanga.com, that's got access to your books, The Business of Home Building. And then you've also got a second book on the way, and you've got a number of podcasts on there if people want to hear more about your journey and expertise. But for now, is there any other way you want people to reach out to you, Jose, if they've enjoyed today's conversation and so on to?
Just the standard social media, my Facebook, Instagram, my website, joseberlanga.com, and hopefully there'll be more soon. As I was telling you before, I'm enjoying doing some mentoring and some speaking engagements, and I really look forward to doing more of that. That's really entertaining to me, and continue to write books. That's turning out to be a little easier than I anticipated. So.
It's really terrific. Jose, well, thank you for taking the time out. It's been really delightful speaking to you.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the invitation. It's been great being here with you.